All right, welcome everyone to a meeting of Vermont's Environmental Justice Interagency Committee. We appreciate you all being here. Here are our community agreements. We'll just take a minute to read and reflect on our own. All right, I think we're good on that. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. But first, do we want to vote to approve the minutes from our last meeting? I can put them in the chat if folks haven't seen them. Okay, they're in the chat. Okay, would we like to vote? Folks in favor of approving? All right, perfect. And then the agenda is in the chat for today, but essentially we'll be reorienting ourselves back to the mapping tool. We're going to have a good working session around that. And then we'll have a break, and then we'll move into another working session for the civil rights and EJ complaints. I do want to say we allocated 20 minutes to that section, but I envision that actually taking a little bit longer. So we may need to flex some time there. And then after that, we'll move into kind of wrapping up the baseline spending reports and talking about the next deliverable under the law. And then after that, we'll just, end the meeting with next steps. So folks in favor of the agenda today? All right, beautiful. We can continue. So I'm going to, yeah, this is my slide. All right, so for our presentation, we're going to go over the legal requirements for the mapping tool and then also talk about the two components of this work, the GIS and community engagement components. I also want to say, so from an internal standpoint and from a work planning standpoint, we've been thinking about this deliverable as having two tracks that are working alongside each other. But I'm also being mindful that we don't silo the community engagement and conceptually silo the community engagement work and the GIS work. And I also just want to name up front that I know there are some of you that are really interested in the GIS portion of the work, which is great. And I also want to encourage everyone to think about how you all can inform and also are an important part of the community engagement side of things. So that's my spiel on that. We can go to the next slide. All right, so the mapping tool is intended to depict environmental justice focused populations, to measure environmental burdens at the smallest geographic level. And then next slide, please. We'll recap our role, Agency of Natural Resources. We're charged with creating and maintaining the tool, determining the elements contained in the tool, consulting the advisory council and you all, and then are also the final decision makers in all areas of the creation and maintenance. So taking everyone's consultation and then making final decisions on how things will go. All right, next slide, please. So an overview of the interagency committee's role in the mapping tool consultation is an advisory role. So again, emphasizing that final decisions remain with our agency, A&R. You all provide input to guide what is incorporated into the mapping tool, and then also can use your consensus-driven input on your consultation content. And then also later in the meeting, we'll be talking about additional ways that you all can provide support to this work. All right. Now I'm going to pass it to Juliet to talk about the GIS, Geographic Information Systems, phases of the work.
Cool, thanks, Kim. So as we all are aware, in the creation of the EJ mapping tool, we are taking two sort of concentric tracks to build the tool. One is just the point blank GIS development of the tool itself, but then the other is the community engagement. So what I'll talk about is what the GIS contractor is going to do high level to build this tool and sort of the order of operations for that and how you guys fit in as IAC members. And then Kim will talk about the community engagement side of this project. So high level, starting first with, a bird's eye view of what the GIS contractor will do. They're going to start by building a strong work plan that will ultimately be something that we can all coalesce around and figure out how to kind of manage our capacity around to support. Then they'll be conducting research. So this is a really key part of the process is, figuring out what exactly do we need the tool to do, and what pre-existing data already exists to help build the tool, so that we're not totally reinventing the wheel, but we're also identifying gaps. So we know, for example, that there's a lot of census data that doesn't necessarily accurately depict Vermont and Vermonters, just because of the level of data that the census includes. So that's an example of what it would mean to identify a gap. What kind of data are we missing that we should fill in order to really make a tool that's useful for decision making and accurately depicts Vermont. The next step will be developing and integrating data. And so that, could involve when we're filling data gaps, it could involve actually making new data and then finding a way to include it in the tool. And that will happen, I think, really alongside our community engagement contractor as well, which Kim will elaborate on. Next comes the actual initial tool development. That'll be a fun phase, just getting kind of a draft of the tool for us to toy with, figure out, hey, is this something that we think will be useful? What could be better? And then finally, we'll get into connecting with communities, which I should have mentioned at the top of this slide, that these phases are in general chronological order, not geographic, chronological order. And so, this is the order that things will happen in, but there are some of these bullets that may happen simultaneous to one another, just based off of the specific work plan that the contractor offers us. And so connecting with communities will be a key part of the GIS contractor's role, in that we want the GIS contractor to work closely with the community engagement contractor, build relationships with communities, hear directly from communities about how they want to be represented in the tool, and really just take that role seriously of making a true tool, a tool that isn't inaccurately representing Vermont to the extent that we can avoid. And then finally, we get into the last two phases, which are really wrapping up this project. So training and capacity building is a really key part that will involve, providing training on how to use the tool, both for members of the public and for us as state of Vermont employees. How will we use the tool for decision making? How does it fit into our work? And then capacity building. So, really making sure that we have capacity for long-term maintenance of the tool. That's mostly an A&R thing, but just something to flag. And then finally, we get into planning for the future. So again, this is really thinking about how do we transition the data that the GIS contractor has developed, how do we transition it into A&R's hands so that A&R has all the information they need to maintain this tool long-term. That was a kind of long-winded but very brief overview of the GIS phases of this work. But we're going to get into each phase in a little bit of detail in the next couple of slides. So if you have any questions, let's hold off until we get into the detail, and we'll pause after that. So this is where we get into the section of the presentation where I'm going to talk about what's the GIS contractor doing specifically and how do you guys fit in. Just want to note that all of these IAC roles that we're going to be highlighting are really additional places where you can weigh in if you have particular interest in this project and particular expertise. So don't feel like you have to make separate capacity just to support every single step of this process. Really what we want to know, we want to show you the world of possibilities, and then we want to know from you where you're interested in fitting in. So project zero is project management, or task zero is project management. So this will be where the GIS contractor is going to create that work plan that we talked about. And they're also going to set up some project coordination structures like biweekly meetings, both with internally and with our community engagement contractor to stay aligned with our work. Within the work. And so we're asking the contractor to meet with additional stakeholders that could inform the work during this project management period. So that could be the AC, the IAC, each covered agency. It could be, communities that have a particular interest in the mapping tool. It could be really anyone that we are able to identify in this process as a stakeholder. And so we want to offer you the opportunity to participate in these stakeholder meetings with the GIS contractor to help inform this project planning, just so that everybody's involved at sort of the ground floor. Then that brings us to task one, which is background research and discovery. As previously stated, it's important for us to be able to find pre-existing data that will help us build the tool. And then this will also help reveal gaps in data. So as representatives from each of your agencies, an agency is basically a compendium of data. You probably are aware of pre-existing data sets or pre-existing tools that could be really helpful when it comes to avoiding reinventing the wheel and using our time efficiently when it comes to building this tool. So we're asking, to the extent that is relevant, if you're able to provide content, whether that's reports, other mapping projects, data, et cetera, to help the contractor identify existing agency resources. So this is project tasks 0 and 1. I always think that task 0 is such a funny way to put it, but yeah, I digress. It's the pre-work, So then that brings us to task 2. Oh yes, Kim, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick thing, not to belabor this point, but on the earlier slide for, let's see, which one was it? Background research and discovery. I want to also emphasize that if you all have reports or resources that you've created around community engagement efforts or that in any way speak to different communities related to your agency, those things would also be important for the GIS contractor to have, because it will inform availability of data that we currently have. So I just want to make that clear that, again, the GIS contractor still has two like equally important pieces of their work. And so if you all have community engagement resources, those will be helpful as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that point, Kim. That's really important. So taking a look at task 2 and gap filling data development, as previously mentioned, there are going to be gaps in data that we find, and we're going to want to develop data to try and fill those gaps to the extent that we can. So the contractor is going to be developing new data. Hopefully there's new data to be developed easily, and then propose concrete steps to explain how this data is going to be created and how it will help meet the mapping tool requirements. So part of this task, we actually required the contractor to get feedback from our agency, from the advisory council, from the ISE, from communities in this like gap filling venture. And so part of your role could be to provide feedback on how the data produced by the GIS contractor compares to data that you already have. And similarly, what we said to the advisory council is that they can weigh in on like, how does it compare to what I know about the community I represent? Does it actually look like it accurately represents my community? That is to say, you guys aren't just state of Vermont employees in a vacuum, you also exist in communities. So that's like a piece of expertise you bring. So really just reflecting on the data that's produced and how it compares. I'm going to just note, you're going to see it goes from task 2 to task 5. Long story short, we're skipping tasks 3 and 4 because they're very sort of technical in nature. It's very much the GIS contractor putting their head down and getting to work. And it doesn't really include a role for the IAC or the AC, which is why we're skipping those tasks here. We're really just trying to highlight places where you can weigh in. So we're not trying to hide anything. It's just that, you know, we don't want to spend time chatting about stuff that doesn't specifically kind of illustrate your opportunities here. So moving on to task 5, which is the community engagement and participation section of this, we're asking the contractor to participate in at least 5 community engagement activities coordinated by the community engagement contractor. This is going to help build relationships, gather data, and the contractor ultimately, the objective of this is to create a report that explains how the community feedback they gathered will actually make it into the tool. We're expecting a lot of the community feedback to be anecdotal, to be, more, qualitative than quantitative in nature. And so it's important to have diverse ways and diverse methodologies for the tool to represent that data. And so they are required, the GIS contractor, to collaborate with you guys at engagement activities to the extent that you're interested in participating in those engagement activities, which we'll talk about when I pass it to Kim. So long story short, your role as an IAC member could be to collaborate with the contractor at public meetings, listening sessions, and other community touch points to build relationships that support your role as an IAC member. And as Kim mentioned before, in your work at State of Vermont, you have community partners that you are developing relationships with. This is a key part of this as well. We want to, really lean into those relationships to the extent that we can. I'm going to share one more slide and then I'm done talking for a while. I know that I've been talking for a little bit, so I want to assure you I'm almost done. Finally, we get into task 6, which is testing, reporting, and final delivery. This is the task where we're really putting the final bow on our mapping tool. This really is asking the contractor to provide things like thorough user testing to make sure that when the tool becomes available, it's actually usable it's intuitive, it's user-friendly, it's accessible. All these things that we're requiring of the tool, we want to make sure are actually met. And then they'll provide training for staff to use the tool and ensure that the tool meets all of the accessibility requirements that we put forth. And we're also requiring that there are rounds of user testing that people who don't have a background in GIS should be able to, participate in that testing process, just so that, again, the tool's user-friendly and intuitive as opposed to complex and frustrating. Because I think we've all used some pretty frustrating tools in our time, and it'd be great to avoid having this be one of those tools. So an opportunity for you guys would be to participate in the rounds of user testing to ensure that you're able to use the tool, involve your fellow staff members at your agency in the rounds of user testing where you think it's applicable, provide feedback on the usability of the tool, both to support decision-making and day-to-day use once the tool is released. And the contractor is also going to provide some reports that summarize their findings of this user testing and, wrap-up phase. So you're welcome to review those reports as well to support, just making sure that we've dotted all of our I's and crossed our T's. I just want to note there's also a task 7. It's also not listed here because it primarily involves the relationship between the GIS contractor, our agency, and the Agency of Digital Services. It's a lot of just like passing documents around to make sure that when the tool is in our sole care at State of Vermont, we're prepared. So not included here, but very important. Yeah, Abby.
I think my question is similar to what Grace just put in the chat, which is, can we just take a moment to remind us of like what staff, how are we thinking we might use this tool in our work? Or, and I'm thinking like in both the EJ deliverables, but also like the tool in our work more generally. I'm having a hard time sort of even like getting a sense of like who would be the staff that we would expect to use the tool and therefore possibly be a part of the user testing.
Great question. So in short, part of that is going to be informed by you all. So being able to share with the contractor things like, what decisions you might, like at least as a starting place, what decisions, might you turn to the mapping tool to use? And also any use cases that you may have, those are scenarios, those are things that we really need to communicate to the contractor so they're able to refine the tool. And as a reminder, we can put in the chat the RFPs again. But we, like our team, created an RFP that had a lot of it essentially was like this document out there trying to bring folks in that could provide us with a super, what's the word that I'm looking for? We wanted to know what the world of possibilities are, and we wanted to bring someone in that could support us. And so when we understand what you all need the tool to do and what your agencies need to use the tool, and when we have more of an idea of what community folks might need the tool to do, that information alongside these feasibility analyses, and also taking time to work with the Agency of Digital Services to see what functionalities we can actually support. Through all of that, we're going to be able to answer your question. So there is no exact, like, here's what the exact scope of the tool will be. What we're asking is for each contractor to do their analysis and tell us what they feel like the scope should be and how they can best move forward. So I hope that answers your question, even somewhat indirectly.
Yeah, another huge part of this is just that the cumulative environmental burden rule is going to also play a huge role in telling us how we're going to use the tool and what decisions it'll be for. So I think, Carla, are you going to jump in on that point as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. My throat is achy, so excuse my voice. Abby, thank you so much for that question. That's a really good question. And generally, the purpose of the environmental adjusting mapping tools are to depict, as we've spoken about in the past, are to depict burdens and geographies so that decision making in agencies can be informed by those factors. So in terms of potential staff that could benefit from utilizing a tool like that, we the clearest I think would be permitting and regulatory staff, like environmental analysts or program managers, compliance staff, folks that are granting, approving permits. That's really one of the things that come to mind first when we think about how to utilize and inform agency actions is those staff. Also, enforcement and compliance staff may benefit from utilizing an environmental adjusting mapping tool. Understanding the cumulative burden and overburdened communities tends to be really important when engaging in compliance efforts. Additionally, and this is also one of those areas of work that fall very neatly under EJ mapping tools, is planning and policy staff. So when you're thinking about where to develop and how to develop, a mapping tool can definitely help inform that. Policy staff as well. It may help also in conducting equity impact analysis because you will have the opportunity to select a particular geographic area and select in the overlays what kinds of environmental burdens you're interested in. And you would get a clearer depiction of what exists currently and how additional development or actions by the state and otherwise, because this is really, we talk a lot about guiding agencies in decision making, but a tool like this could also be utilized by many other users. It's not solely for state government. So it can definitely help how to think about where to develop and the extent to which those developments impact already impacted communities. Rulemaking too can be informed by a mapping tool. An area that may also be may benefit from having access to an environmental adjusting mapping tool, specifically when the information gathered is relevant to particular programs. It can help grant managers or program coordinators. So you could focus spending or funding in certain communities because there are certain concerns that impact that community that you would be able to make those determinations and support equitable distribution, which, as we know, is part of some of the work that we've been doing with the baseline spending report and the goal of proportionality. Of course, data and GIS specialists that fits very neatly under folks who would benefit from having access to information contained in a mapping tool. And then when we think about broadly the work of our agencies, community engagement is also an important area of work that could benefit staff if they had access to information contained in the mapping tool. I mean, those are some of the staff that that come to mind right away. But as you can see, Avi and others, the mapping tool, really, we think about it and immediately we think about regulatory staff and guiding decision making to sort of like regulate certain communities over others, and the extent to which that regulatory action will take place. But there are many other spaces that could benefit from having access to a mapping tool that's ground truth in Vermont, and that the data actually captures the realities that are encountered by certain populations in Vermont. So I hope that that was helpful. Um, if you want more information, we can actually work on putting together, generally what tools of this kind do. When we had the federal tools, they had really great information online about how to utilize and inform actions by agencies and other entities. So we could work on something like that with the contractor once we are onboarding, where they're onboarded and working towards the completion of the mapping tool.
So I just want to flag, I know Bob has his hand up. Grace also asked two really good questions in the chat. I also just want to keep an eye on the time. So Kim, I'll defer to you on how you want to move through this section.
I think that the questions are important and could inform the working session. I also want to name part of the working session gives you all time to review these slides, specifically the ones about your role. So if we have to move quickly through the community engagement ones, that's fine, because you'll have about 15 minutes to read these to yourself. So I'm in support of continuing with questions. Maybe Bob, and then we can go back and look at Grace's questions.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a lot to say. I appreciate, Carla, what you said. It was a good summary. I also think there's an audience that could benefit greatly from the mapping tool, and that would be the legislature itself. And I'm just talking in the current context right there. House Education, Senate Education is looking at doing school redistricting maps, and there's great differences of opinion of how school district mapping should happen. If this is just one example, but I could see it being used to actually do targeted legislation that is keeping in spirit with the EJ law. And I couldn't think of a better tool that they could have at their disposal than actually seeing where all the focus populations are. And if there is a more targeted way of doing legislation that has timely and impactful changes, I think this tool could be one in the toolbox of many other things. So that's really all I wanted to say. And the only other thing I think I've said it in the past, and it just is a concern, given the nature of the current federal climate and ice activities, even in Vermont, I get worried about a map that has really clear blocks of identified minorities that are really at risk. And now it's almost like we're given a roadmap to federal agencies that would be more easily able to do some of the initiatives that are currently a priority for the federal government. And I know we can't hide that data, but it scares me. If I was one of the EJ focused populations, I would be concerned that we're just given a roadmap to finding us much more easily. And I know that's not something we can solve, but it's just a concern I have. So I'll stop there.
Carla, I think you had your hand up, or can we go to Grace?
Yeah, I just wanted to clap and I raised my hand accidentally. But yes, Bob, that is an incredibly important point. The legislature could rely on the information contained in the mapping tool to create legislative bills and laws that actually take into consideration data that's been vetted and portrays very clearly what some of the concerns and issues are on the ground that those, like bills would look to solve for. And also it could create a repository of information for actions that are not being even considered, as we uncover data that perhaps has not been shared broadly or still identified as a concern in Vermont. So I want to elevate that comment, and thank you so much for sharing that, Bob.
Let's look at Grace's question. I don't have the chat open right now, so Julia, if you can see it, would you mind reading one of them?
Yeah, so Grace said, the definition of burdens in the law is very long. Is the contractor going to be responsible for narrowing the scope of what to show, or are we responsible for that input? The answer, Grace, is that any definitions under the law are solely within the AC and the IAC scope to alter. The contractor is certainly able to, based off of the data that they're able to compile, can provide us with recommendations on like what actually should be visually represented in the tool. But in terms of altering the definition or narrowing the scope of the definition itself, I think that that's really the AC and the IACs within their wheelhouse. And then the other question that Grace asked is, can you talk a bit about timeline of the mapping tool versus the rule? That I think maybe is a good question for Carla. I'll pass it to Carla for that.
Sorry, I'm responding to questions in the chat. I love the chat; it's so active. I really, I really love this. So the deadlines, oh yes, interesting. So as you know, we've talked about in the past about the order of operations in the law, and we've discussed many times how some of the deliverables, if not most of them or all of them, provide very limited time to do certain ways, the way that we would really want to do them, like engagement. And so the mapping tool vis-a-vis the cumulative burden rule is one of those areas where the timelines are very tight. So we have the mapping tool in statute being due January 1st, 2027. And 6 months later, the cumulative burden rulemaking needs to be finalized. Of course, we know that 6 months prior to a rule being adopted formally, there's not much engagement occurring with communities. It's already in the administrative process. So basically what this means is that we would have virtually a rule that's already scoped, that's already drafted and seen and public commented before the mapping tool is final. So that's one of those areas of complexity with regard to the timeline in the EJ law. So thank you so much for asking that question, Grace. We are working internally at the agency to try to get ahead of the deliverables and not wait for this like overlap in deliverables. So the cumulative burden rulemaking, we already started last year thinking through a process whereby we can have the scoping done very robustly in the next several months. And that includes consultation with the advisory council and engagement with all of the agencies. Um, we have a work plan that we're still going through the motions of identifying whether the periods of time align with the mapping tool. And in order for us to do that assessment so that we can share broadly, we are meeting with the contractors for the creation of the mapping tool to further align those tasks and milestones. So I really appreciate
you
that
for all that.
question. Yeah, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that question, Grace, because that really goes into a lot of what CREJU does and the environmental justice coordinators do, which is trying to align all of the deliverables, all of the internal engagement and the scoping, and also try to inform the tasks and deliverables that will get us to timely completion way before we're having conversations in the public forum. So thank you.
So, yeah, so the mapping tool is due January 2027, and the community engagement and the rule are due like springish 2027.
Yeah, July
Right, that-
2027.
That is
totally
correct.
bonkers.
That is correct. That is correct. But that's
Yeah.
why, Grace, we started doing a lot of heavy lifting with regards to scoping questions, having conversations with our legal staff, having conversations with program staff, and doing a lot of comparative analysis. Using data and information from other states to inform the scoping process in Vermont. I was going to say in Vermont, but amongst all of us, so that when we come and have these conversations here at the public forum, we're actually going to present you all with a very clear analysis of the options that we can explore together so that we can further narrow the scope of our rule. So there's a lot of work taking place right now. In the last month, I met internally with over like 20 staff at the Agency of Natural Resources to further understand the potential impacts of a rule of this kind in many different staffs, like regulatory and otherwise. Like, as you know, our agency touches on so many different areas of work. Enforcement is one of them, permitting, another, conservation, parks, fish and wildlife. So we're doing all of that, and we will share a robust scoping memo with you all for your consideration, and we will be providing office hours to further consult and get your feedback so that we continue narrowing down the the potential avenues we all have in the rulemaking. But yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
The community engagement plan is coming too, and they're all
Yeah.
like are very close to each other.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I do still have questions about like what I just chatted, but I know that's not really related to the tool, so I can wait.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful questions. So I think to support timing, it might make sense for us to just move directly into the working session, because I don't think we need to go over the slides. So I put in the chat essentially the slides that you're seeing on the screen. And so there's the GIS side of things, and then the community engagement roles follow. The one thing that I would have communicated in the presentation is just making that point again that you all, that there's value for you all in the community engagement process, and that process speaks directly to the GIS process as well. So if we want to take maybe maybe 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. Maybe in 15 minutes, you guys can let us know if you need more time to go through those tasks. And yeah, I think, Juliet, were you gonna explain this real quick?
Yep.
Okay.
So, as Kim put in the chat, there's a PDF that includes the slides we would have shown you in the last couple of minutes, both the GIS role, IAC roles and the community engagement IAC roles. We'd like you to take 15 minutes to look at those roles and kind of, if you have an opportunity to just like take some notes on what is it that you're interested in doing, realistically, what do you even have the capacity to do? That's a really important question. We'd love for folks to at least dedicate some capacity to the tool development, but we want to be realistic around that. And as you're looking at these roles or potential roles, please just keep in mind that, as I said previously before we started presenting these roles, these are extra things that you can do to support the development of the mapping tool based off of your expertise and your interest. However, the minimum thing that the IAC needs to do to meet the legal requirements of the law is to provide consultation on the elements that will be included in the mapping tool, which we will have public consultation about that alongside the contractors. But I'm just sharing that these roles that are in this PowerPoint, again, they're like extra things that you can do based off of your expertise and your interest, where you want to fit in. That would be just extremely helpful to help with the development of the tool. Before we jump into the working session, Carla, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Juliet and Kim. I would like to share that this is particularly important for us, given where we're at in the process of finalizing and looking at work plans that the contractors have put forth. And so we already had this conversation with the advisory council, and we're going to make sure that what comes out of this conversation is captured in those documents that we are finalizing with the contractors. So this is particularly important, and don't feel that you have to share right now. If you still have questions, you can touch base with us later on and share your interests based on availability and capacity. But it would be really helpful for us to have a sense of what you can support, what you're interested in engaging with the contractors around for those purposes.
Thanks, Carla. So let's take a moment. Everybody turn their cameras off, mute. We'll come back around 1:10. During that time between now and 1:10, please just take a look at that PDF and reflect on these prompts. Are there phases or tasks that you're interested in informing? If yes, which ones? Are there phases or tasks that you're interested in participating in? If yes, what actually do you need to meaningfully participate? I just want to emphasize, it is okay if it turns out you're not interested in informing any parts of this process, or if you're like, I really realistically don't have the time or capacity, that's okay. We just need to know. So that's really what the goal of this conversation. So let's come back at 1:10 and we will jump back into discussion. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. The prompts are also in the chat. Thanks, folks.
Yes, 11. Yep, 11:10. Okay, everyone, let's come back, talk about next steps here because we have a couple more things that we need to cover. So I appreciate you all taking time to do that. Hopefully that was helpful. I think what makes sense is perhaps we do a quick round of circle process where you all just answer one question. And I'll pose that question in a minute. And then whatever notes, thoughts, reflections, or additional responses to the questions we provided earlier, whatever you have for that, if you could each individually just send an email to Juliet and I, that'll be helpful because we don't have enough time to do the full activity, but we still want to, see if there's any consensus possibly on any structures that you all could use to support this work. So the question that we'd like an answer to is if you feel like it would be helpful to have either a working group or a task group that could support either the coordination of this work or just create some systems so that you all can participate. So that's the question. Should we explore a working group or a task group? And we'll just go around, and if you can give a yes or a no answer, that'll at least provide some visibility across the interagency committee. Does that sound good?
Just to clarify, Kim, you mean like a working group or a task group focused on mapping tool development, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yes. And the purpose of this is just to get an idea of where your head is while still allowing us to move forward in the meeting. So is there anyone that would like to answer first?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
If we were to have a subgroup, task group, would you imagine that the consultants would lead that process? And I don't actually even know who the second community engagement consultant is, but
Yeah.
anyway, just as a general question.
Yeah, it's written into both contracts that they would have to coordinate with you all, and the specifics of that we'll, figure out. But yeah, there's going to be some coordination. I don't know, Carla, if you have any additional thoughts you want to share about that.
Yes, Abby, again, I really appreciate that question. And the way that we've been thinking about the engagement, again, this is an area where a lot of alignment needs to occur with the many different groups that are going to be involved. So the short answer is yes. And more nuanced answer is the extent to which there is a coordination coming from the contractor will be discussed in the first several meetings that we have as a collective. And that means the community engagement contractor, the GIS contractor, and then the advisory council if they decide to have a group or subgroup or working group, and then the IAC. This is already built into the proposals. And I also would like to share that the tasks that you were reviewing, they come from the work plans that the contractors put together. So the question is trying to get to whether representational capacity may be the best way to move forward with informing the interests of the IAC to the contractors. What we don't want to see occurring is missing important information or concerns coming from the agencies regarding each of the phases of the process. And, you know, capacity is tight. We're fully aware of that. So perhaps there's a way in which we can create an efficiency where a group is created ad hoc specifically for the purpose of the mapping work. And it could be that there's a membership that, you know, does not necessarily need to carry over through the completion of the group, but some sort of governance structure that would allow that smaller group to consult the larger group and then bring that to the community engagement contractor and the GIS contractor. They will be providing reports through the process. Um, so that is another way in which we could create an efficiency if we had a subgroup, is they could review those reports, communicate broadly to the rest of the IAC, and then come back with feedback and responses or concerns and challenges. So yes, there is a lot of opportunity to have an engaged process, and it can go from very involved to not that involved. But you know, that end of the spectrums concerns me, just because we will, as covered agencies, relying very heavily on the work of these folks to put together a tool that we will utilize into the future.
Can I ask a question also?
Sure.
So I guess in thinking about the capacity concern, my team also has their own capacity concerns, but I'm wondering if there is a working group that's more focused on this. Is it possible for that to be someone that's not an IAC member, but someone that's on my team, for example?
Yes. Yes, and we
'Cause
already
I think
have
that would
that.
help a lot.
Yes, we already have that model with the community engagement plan work. We have some folks that are not members of the IAC working and representing their agencies, connecting with the members. So we have that from AG, and it's been really helpful, because it frees up some of the resources that we have.
Claire?
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I was going to answer your question if that works, which is that I I actually don't know. I think at this point if a task group or working group is needed, like some of the GIS tasks seems like they could be distinct asks to all IAC members, and if you have data, then you respond, and if you don't, you don't. And then other tasks, like maybe the more involved community engagement components, seem like they could lend themselves to more of a task group approach for people who want to be more regularly involved. So I think maybe it's like a yes for some things and others maybe not. So that's my short answer. And on the capacity question, I think it would be helpful to the extent you know, like rough timelines for each of these tasks, to share that information, because to Stephanie's point, like that may help us internally dedicate resources, whether it's IAC members or not.
Yeah, all great points, Claire. Thank you. And with regards to the timeline, we are in the process of developing that. As I mentioned earlier, we need to align a lot of groups. And for example, we had a meeting with RPCs, and they are written into one of the work plans. So we need to make sure that we can align all of the deliverables. And so we're taking the time to do that in an intentional way. So that those timelines are coming. Like I said, we're still in conversation and we have a meeting with Stone Environmental coming up to further, finalize the timeline. Now, with regards to the first portion, Claire, my concern is if, what you mentioned for the GIS is if the GIS contractor has questions, then we can present those to the full body. And then several concerns come to mind. One is how would we do that if in writing without the quorum concern becoming a reality? And then also we have meetings all throughout the year, and we are also looking at what topics we're going to be covering. And so having a distinct group, a smaller group where the contractor can send questions or data that they're gathering, and then have that group figure out those logistics would really create like a smoother process. And I think an efficiency that is going to be really important, just given all of the moving pieces that are going to be, moving at the same time with regards to this mapping tool. So that consultation piece is going to be very important, and I am not sure how we would do that without taking space from public meetings regularly, and in writing with the care that we need to employ so as to not inadvertently, create a meeting.
Yep, Bob.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Claire spurs a good conversation point. I wonder if there's merit to all the agencies that know they have data that they would want to be considered. All that data could be got sent to VCGIS. They get it into one database that then they can communicate directly to with the contractor. In other words, there's much of the data say that for all the school district planning, we provided them gobs of data, and John Adams and his team have been wonderful getting incredible, powerful mapping capabilities. If every agency could provide John and his group with all the data, he can get it into the formatting, and then maybe the contractor can pick and choose what data ultimately is the best for all the agencies, based on agency feedback. But at least the data would be all, say, collated into one database where they could go reach it, and then that could be shared with them. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a great thought and great efficiency. And I'm sure we can come up with other options. Any other thoughts to wrap up this part of the conversation today? Okay, so just want to name a couple of things. There's the March 15th Civil Rights and EJ complaint reports that are due. Another thing that we had on the agenda today was to look at your updated EJ complaint work plan. And then another important thing was that the advisory council submitted a request to you all about the baseline spending reports. So those are the three kind of things, major things that are left. And this is all, this is ultimately your meeting. And so I think I just need some clarity on what we want to use the last 30 minutes of this meeting to do here.
I mean, it feels like we need to do all of those things. So if we need to schedule additional time, like I don't know how else to do it. It doesn't mean that we have to find the time today, but I don't see how we don't address all three of those.
Yeah, I agree. Carla, do you want to
How-
weigh in on this?
Yes, how about we already shared the materials for the work plan, and there's a timeline associated with the phases. Perhaps there's some work there that could happen asynchronously, and you take the time to go over the proposed timeline based on the conversation that we had last time when we met. And you let us know whether there are any questions that you have asynchronously. That may be. Mhm.
Just to clarify, Carla, the purpose of that would be it overall to make a determination of whether or not the work plan is something that should be included in our submission to the advisory council on March 13th, because March 15th is a Sunday, correct? So that's just really a
Correct.
yes or no question we need to collectively answer.
Correct. So during our last meeting, we discussed the work plan, and there was conversation about proposing a timeline that was captured in the timeline that we shared. So the question would be whether is to your satisfaction, and if we share that timeline with the advisory council. Or if you have concerns with regards to the timeline, and we should not share and commit to that timeline that's proposed.
So they'll provide those thoughts in writing to us, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yes, so that we can free up some time to then talk about the other two areas that I think are more difficult to have and go through asynchronously.
Okay, the work plan and the timeline are in the chat, and we will send them by email as well. So then we should move into the request, the advisory council's request. So just copy and paste that slide just to be efficient here. So the slide is in the chat.
Share my screen if you want, Kim.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So the request is, so Mariana posed a request, which is that each IAC member provides a simple 10-minute presentation summarizing their baseline spending report, highlighting the most relevant information for the advisory council. And really, the point of this is just for them to understand, what we feel is best so that they can move forward in supporting the implementation of the law, having an understanding of these reports. So we wanted to see how you all felt, about that request, maybe vote on if you'd like to do that. I also just want to mention, we had a great meeting with the advisory council the other day, and we presented a version of this presentation we just gave you. And we got a lot of really good feedback on the way that we presented and the information that we shared. And so I just want to also qualify that presentation in this case doesn't have to be a PowerPoint or lots of slides. I think just what's most important is providing this information in a simple way and highlighting what the advisory council needs to know. And then also the next time that you all will be meeting with the advisory council is March 11th. So that could be an option if you'd like to use part of that meeting to do this. So I'll step back and see how you all feel, and we can move forward from there. Yep, go ahead, Abby.
Thanks. Yeah, I love Mariana's request. I think this came up in a previous meeting of feeling like the AC members didn't understand kind of like the complexity of where we were going. And so I really think it's valuable for us to make the time to give them a kind of like a briefing of probably some very lengthy reports from many covered entities. Yeah, so I love the idea, and I think we owe that to the advisory council members at a minimum. I don't know if each agency will need 10 minutes or each entity will need 10 minutes, but I think we could be very brief. I wasn't sure what the vote was on the request, so that, and maybe you said that, Kim, and I missed it. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Just wondering if we want to vote in this meeting here.
Oh, got it. I'm
to do
sorry.
that. Oh yeah, no, no
Gotcha.
worries. And then if maybe we could just do the vote now, and then we can talk about what, how you want to approach your presentation. Does that work? So are folks in favor? Raise your hand, give us a thumbs up. All right, wonderful. Lovely to hear.
Okay, cool.
I think Jenny just raised her hand.
Oh, you're muted, Jenny.
I said I did because I'm pressing all of the wrong buttons for the illustrated by the meeting. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So Janet, we're voting on if you all would like to fulfill the advisory council's request to share for each agency to, at a public meeting, share an abbreviated version of their baseline spending reports to support the advisory council in understanding, what they need to know to move forward in implementing the law. So that's what that vote was on. And then maybe we could take 10 minutes to just talk about how you want to approach the presentation or just communicating this information. As Abby said, maybe not everyone will need 10 minutes. Maybe in some cases, it's just, providing like talking points or things like that. Maybe part of it's asking questions. I don't know. So if maybe folks just want to go around and share any initial thoughts about this so that you guys can figure out when would be appropriate or when you'd have enough time to prepare if March 11th doesn't feel like enough time.
Yeah, so that's the other piece too about this conversation is, as Kim indicated, the next joint meeting is March 11th. We were thinking about the structure of that meeting, and we put together a timeline. So if you could speak about logistics for that meeting, Kim, the way that we've envisioned, we anticipated that we were going to get to consensus on doing this.
Sure, give me 1 second to pull up my notes on that. But if anyone has initial thoughts, feel free to just come off mute and share.
So one piece that I'm thinking about that could be a bit redundant between presentations across covered entities would be like some of the challenges and proportionality kind of pieces. And I'm curious if there's a way that we could kind of like streamline that in a presentation, in a discussion with the AC, and have more of our presentation focused on like what our baseline reporting identified. Like I just really quickly, I had to do something for our internal team at the Agency of Agriculture recently, and I was like, okay, we had environmental benefit investments across however many towns and how much money and across what was the average each year and what were some of the considerations that we looked at and what were the environmental benefits that our agency was delivering, like real high level, like on the data side, not so much on the process really, or the pieces that were challenging. So I think the implementation of this part, I think the challenges are really important. So maybe there's like a shared part of the joint meeting that's focused on those challenges, many of which were captured in the cover letter. And I think some of us covered that in our reports as well. So I don't want to not talk about that, but I also don't know that the AC needs to hear it 6 different times or 10 different times.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Amy.
Oh, and can you hear me through the room?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, I was just thinking about another conversation around, like, would it be helpful for the AC, if they haven't seen it already, just the inventory, like the actual inventory spreadsheet to see how, I think, multiple agencies used that. So to see how the guidance was transformed into a spreadsheet that programs then fill out. So maybe that's another piece that we don't need to do multiple times. But even I feel like it would take me 5 minutes to kind of just like walk through our process at the Department of Health and also just like future possibilities, the like really positive outcomes that came from the conversations, even if the report itself was just, wasn't what we had expected. So I don't think it'll take me very long.
So just to resonate back, part of what you said is maybe doing some sort of exercise where you talk about how the guidance related to the inventory sheet. And then what was the last 2 things you said? Could you just recap them?
I was just saying that I don't think it will take me too long to talk about our process and then really highlight what we're hoping to do into the future.
Okay, yeah. So positive, trying to end on a positive note and seeing where we can move forward. That makes sense and definitely would relate to the AC. Are there other thoughts? I think this is helpful also for our team to understand how we could possibly structure the meeting. But it's helpful to hear how you all might approach this. I do like the idea too, Abby, of just having maybe like a shared presentation ahead of everyone's individual responses. But I'll step back and let everyone contribute.
Okay, I intentionally raised my hand this time. I would just say, if we start with the cover letter, to be honest, I think most of the land use review board stuff would be covered under that. So I'd be happy to help on that. I also don't think that we need more than maybe 2 minutes and would rather step aside and let more agencies that have like more interesting information than sorry. So
Grace.
Yeah, just wanted to jump in and offer ACCD's perspective again, echoing what others have said. I don't think my presentation would take too long because we didn't end up analyzing that many programs, but I'm very happy to talk about challenges because we had a lot of those.
Thank you. Also important for the AC. Other thoughts?
Yeah, mine won't take very long either. I think the agency of education is maybe a little different only because the bulk of the spending that we reported on was during COVID and post-COVID federal funds. So they weren't really discretionary at all. That was a large volume of the number of grants that we actually harvested through the historical look back. And then any of the other discretionary funds that the AOE disperses, because we do weighting for 2 of the focus populations already, and it's a favorable weight. In other words, if it's a student that's an English language learner, or at a poverty level, they get a weighted adjustment that's higher than one pupil. So we're already over proportioning the spending for those two focus populations on any of those types of programs. So we have a favorable pitch in terms of saying it's not that we're doing proportionate spending. In two of the three focus populations, we're actually doing more spending because of the weightings that they're given in the educational funding formula. And then I would say, kind of like what Amy was saying, a positive look going future. It's really, what is the legislature doing with legislation going forward with our school redistricting and school construction aid? Do we want to have EJ be a prioritization or be a consideration in the prioritization schema when deciding how to prioritize limited funds to many recipients that want to get it? And so should EJ factor into the prioritization schema? That's where we think EJ with education comes into play, and that's in the school construction funding. So ours won't take long, and I think it can have a positive spin to end on if the legislature wants to embrace the very same law that they enacted.
Thank you. All right. Any last thoughts? I wanted to resonate back what I heard, but it sounds like Carla may have done that in the chat. But just to recap, we talked about going over high level the cover letter again, because not everyone may have seen that. And then each agency sharing, your individual challenges and successes. And then if it's relevant, sharing any findings or, your general analysis in plain language. And then kind of ending on this positive outcome. How do we move forward? What are we aspiring to after that? And then I think it does make sense to have a Q&A. And I think approaching that in a way that allows the advisory council to kind of lead that section, I think would be good. So how does all of that sound?
I have a question about the facilitating the first portion of the conversation. So who should do this, the presentation on the cover letter information, like the challenges? Of course, the EJ coordinators could do that, but I am wondering, since this was an ask presented to the IAC, whether some of us should do that, or if you believe it's okay for the EJ coordinators to present that information. Oh, Jenny offered. Oh, great. Fantastic. Yay, Jenny.
Oops. You don't have to do it alone, Jenny.
Okay.
You don't have to, yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think that actually is a fantastic idea. So does anyone else would like to present alongside Jenny that portion of the conversation? Yay, Amy! Okay, great.
It'll be good because we'll have a no data agency and a lots of data agency to balance things out.
That's fantastic. Thank you, folks. Okay, so then we have Amy and Jenny, and that's the proposed structure for the meeting. Of course, it'll be more skillfully prepared, but that's high level what the meeting will look like then. Thank you so much, folks. Kim?
Okay. I think so. We should also touch base on the March 15 civil rights and EJ complaint reports. I'll also step back and let you all jump in.
I'll dive in and say we have nothing to report from this year. I was wondering where we're at with the idea of sort of a more a joint reporting system, and maybe we could all just do a single report related to that, unless anyone else has specific EJ or environmental EJ or Title VI complaints. I don't know.
Well, I am wondering whether there's another approach which could be, the common shared report, and then each of the agencies have a section to add on to their previous disclosure. We will have information to share specifically to the civil rights and EJ complaints concerns portion, but I think the rest, which would be related to the centralized intake system, is the same, right? And let me just repeat myself from past meetings. Civil rights is just outside the scope of the reporting under this process. I mean, on the intake mechanism, because civil rights intake mechanisms are prescribed very heavily by our federal partners. So would be focusing on EJ intake mechanism, and we would make that clear in the narrative portion that's common to all of the agencies. And then the suggestion would be to have each agency report on the substance of EJ or civil rights complaints concerns independently. So that could be a way to approach it.
Just from a logistics perspective, I just want to weigh in and say, from a logistics perspective, having a single document that we're compiling just could be fraught. I don't know. It's just there's a lot of us with a lot of different ways of working. So it's just I'm just putting it out there that if we wanted to compile a single document, it would probably be more like you all contribute a PDF that we combine into a single PDF.
Yeah,
I'll just ways to do that. Go ahead, Claire. Sorry.
No, Julia, I raised my hand to make the same point. I would be really concerned with the time we have to develop a unified document that all of our leadership, for those who need leadership sign off, like I would, to do that before March 15th. Like, I know my leadership would need at least a week to review something, and that would be like getting them something next week. So that would be my primary concern, although I think in the future, one unified report is not a bad idea.
Like, I understand how it can save a lot of capacity, so that we're not all repeating ourselves, but for this particular reporting, I guess, iteration, it's kind of going to be a lot to make that happen.
Right. You're probably going to have to restate something you've already said, and I might be oversimplifying. Can you tell me the relationship with the work plan and this submission? Is it not the case that we could use the timeline and work plan as part of our individual? Like, could the agencies sign on, like review it, get it through our leadership, sign on to it as part of this submission process, or I'm missing something?
Yeah, so the submission itself, like that we're minimally asked to do, is just report on the civil rights and EJ complaints we received in the last year.
Yeah.
But that timeline and work plan is specifically speaking to the idea of creating a unified intake system for EJ complaints, which is like, and in addition to the complaints themselves that we have to report on if we have any. So there's like two elements there, if that makes sense.
So even if the last couple of years, the Department of Health is saying we want to do what the advisory council is saying in creating a unified system, and therefore we don't have any, we still need to say we don't have any. Got it.
Yep. But then the timeline, we could just collectively decide that the timeline and work plan, we're showing in good faith. Hey, we're making an effort towards actually doing that thing that the advisory council asked us to do. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
So then
if it's helpful. Oh, sorry, Carla.
Yeah, no, Abby. So yeah, well, so what I am thinking is maybe we could do a report that's shared about the unified intake mechanism, and then we could include, depending on where things are, if you all have opportunity to look at the timeline, share it, and get the green light, we can put that together on behalf of all of the agencies and submit it for you all to review. That portion only, the intake mechanism, and that can be shared. And then we would include all of the agencies that have signed on to, which, the ideal thing would be to have all of us. If you need more time, then let us know as well, and then we can submit the work plan without the associated timeline. So that is another alternative, and then we also could put that together, and then share the work plan and have that submitted on behalf of all of the agencies. And then each of the agencies then provide or create their report responsive to the question of civil rights and EJ complaints. Claire, you are asking, could we have be on March 15th to do that? To do what? The timeline?
Yeah, to have an opportunity to draft what I imagine would be a cover letter and then have all the agencies sign off on that. Something I would think our agency would be supportive of. But again, like in terms of our leadership structure, that it just takes time to run those reviews through up the chain of command. So knowing that that's not part of the required reporting that needs to be in on March 13th, if we could take until the end of March and just signal to the advisory council, we've been working on a work plan. We plan to submit that to you by the end of this month. I'm happy to participate in that. I just worry that that will be a real stretch to complete in the next basically 2.5 weeks.
Can I speak to that? So for DPS, what we did, just to, if this is helpful for folks, so but it addresses any complaints that we've received over the past year. And then at the bottom, there's a note that basically nods to this process and saying that we're looking to be a part of this process, partnering with other agencies to develop this system. So it's just like a couple of sentences that speak to that other process without the detail included. So if that's helpful, Claire, I'm happy to send you the language that we included for it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I have almost the exact same report in draft, so happy to align language. Yeah.
And to answer your question, Claire, I believe, it would be up to us to determine whether we would like to fold in the work plan and the timeline into this response. As you said, we could provide a response that focuses on the complaints portion um, of the of the ask, and we could include language that communicates that the agencies are also working towards finalizing a work plan that will be submitted to the advisory council at a later time. I think that is reasonable. The question would be how other agencies feel about that.
Sounds great.
Okay, so then to reiterate, what we are agreeing on doing is on March 13th, we each will provide our response, and that will cover specifically the question about civil rights complaints and environmental justice complaints. And in that report, each of the agencies reserve the opportunity to communicate that there's a work plan that's being developed, that we are in the process of reviewing internally and getting approvals to share at a later time with the advisory council. Am I correct in my understanding? Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Glad that there's some consensus there. And Juliet just put in the chat that on March 13, each covered agency will provide their civil rights and EJ complaint reports, including acknowledging the forthcoming work plan, create the intake mechanism. So I feel like we're all on the same page about that. Carl, were you going to say one other thing?
Yes, one last thing then would be that you then already have the final draft of the work plan, and you have an associated timeline that speak to each of the phases. And if you need anything else to vet that information internally or support internal review process and approval, please let us know. And a last question that I have is, should we communicate a deadline whereby we will be communicating to the advisory council so that that gets incorporated into our responses to the council? For when we will be sharing with them the next steps in the work planning?
Carla, will you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
So should we come up with a deadline on internal review and approval of the timeline and work plan that we would then communicate to the advisory council in our March 13 submissions? Just to provide more teeth and accountability. Those would be the benefits.
Yeah, so that would be for us to have all reviewed the work plan, the timeline and task documents, and kind of had a thumbs up, and then enough time to prepare a cover letter for that to be sent to the AC. That's the tasks and timeline that we would be, that's the tasks that we'd be creating a timeline for. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Claire mentioned that as part of the process of signing on to the work planning that's been proposed, and the creation of that intake mechanism, that she would have to have internal conversations with leadership and other folks in the agency, so that she would need time. So my question then becomes whether we are going to communicate to the advisory council on March 13th that agencies are reviewing work planning and timeline, and we will have an answer to them on a particular date later in March or April.
And just to
Or should we just leave it
clarify,
open?
I think if our plan is just to get all the agencies to give a thumbs up to the timeline and the work plan, but not have a joint statement that we're sending the documents with, then that could probably be feasible in the next 2.5 weeks. Like if we're just providing the drafts and in an email that goes to the IAC or the advisory council, we say we've also worked on this and are looking forward to talking about this with you at a future meeting. I think where my red flag or concern came from is hearing conversation about a joint statement that we would draft,
see.
and that felt like a
I
longer
see.
process. So if
I
I
see.
misunderstood someone, that I apologize, but that is what I was thinking, like a little bit more time might be needed.
Yeah, so then that would actually be really helpful, Claire, if we could do that by March 13th, because then the statutory deadlines for the response for the AC then apply. So we would then have a response from the AC regarding the work plan that we're proposing and the timeline. So that would be really helpful for us to get an understanding from the AC whether they believe that what we're proposing is dispositive of their concerns and recommendations.
I would also say if it's helpful, so looking at the timeline, this isn't a statutory timeline. This is our guide for how we think the timeline will go.
Correct.
Any reason why we
The
couldn't
proposed,
say something
correct.
changed, we need a little more time.
Correct.
Within the timeline. So it's a plan. So I don't see any issue with the plan and any issue getting my agency to say, great, sounds good. Let's start here. And if things need to adjust because things happen, we can deal with that later. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't include this as a, here's what we're striving to do within the
Okay.
submission.
Okay. And then what we can do is make it very clear that this is our work plan and is subject to change should circumstances require so. Okay. So we're back to the original plan of submitting the work plan with that tentative proposed timeline, subject to change, should it be necessary. And then each of the agencies will provide their own response with regards to the complaint process, to the civil rights and EJ complaint process, and will refer to the work planning and the timeline. Okay, fantastic.
Okay. I think we're good here. So thank you, everyone. Good job today. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.